3 days earlier, Robert Kennedy was killed by an assassin's bullet at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. For those who were there, the agonizing moments which followed the shooting will never be forgotten.
By that time, the pandemonium had broken loose. I mean, everybody was screaming.
There were people yelling, Kennedy was shot, Kennedy was shot, get an ambulance, get a doctor.
Many people jumped on Sirhan and hitting him, yelling and screaming.
Somebody was trying to get the gun, they couldn't get the gun out of his hand. It was like frozen in his hand.
So I was afraid somebody was going to snap his back, because by that time, Greer and Rayford Johnson had shown up, and I thought they just snapped him like a matchstick. And Greer finally got possession of the gun and gave it to Rayford Johnson. And it was agreed, Johnson was to hold on to that gun, not give it to anyone until the police arrived.
On April 17, 1969, Sirhan B. Sirhan was convicted of the first-degree murder of Robert Kennedy. Sirhan never denied killing Kennedy, but has claimed on several occasions that he cannot remember the period of time of the shooting. The final report of the Los Angeles Police Department definitively states that Sirhan acted alone and fired the fatal shot. Throughout history, the shockwaves of political assassination have almost inevitably given rise to questions of conspiracy. In that regard, the murder of Robert Kennedy is no exception. Despite the fact that Sirhan was apprehended at the scene after firing 8 shots, it is denied that anyone else was involved. But in this instance, there are researchers and eyewitnesses who claim to have evidence which suggests that a second gun was fired in the Ambassador Hotel, and that it may not have been Sirhan who fired the fatal shot.
I don't think it's even possible that Sirhan could have shot Senator Kennedy 4 times at point-blank range. It's not even possible.
I, at this point, feel that there probably was a second gun there and that it was fired.
The chief of detectives who supervised the investigation disagrees.
There's no question in my mind that Sirhan killed Kennedy and he acted alone.
Was there more than one gun fired that night? Just this week, the Washington Post published an article by Dan Moldea detailing new evidence which addresses this disturbing question. We'll examine both sides of this most important and controversial case in one moment on Unsolved Mysteries.
Did you know, if you're not using AT&T,
Get me Brogan's order.
now, it could take as long as this to connect a long...
Investigators claim that eyewitness accounts and other evidence contradict the official police report. We have carefully reenacted the event based on both crime scene evidence and eyewitness testimony. The evening of June 4th, 1968 began as a celebration.
I thank all of you who made this possible this evening.
With a victory in the California primary, Senator Robert F. Kennedy became the favorite to win the Democratic presidential nomination.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
After concluding his speech, Senator Kennedy was scheduled to attend a press conference in the Colonial Room, some 40 yards away. Kennedy exited from the rear of the stage, turned right, traveled down a hallway, and entered the hotel's kitchen pantry. Kennedy was escorted by a hotel maitre d' and paused to shake hands with the kitchen staff. Contrary to popular belief, there were no photographs or film footage taken at the exact moment of the shooting. Sirhan fired a .22 caliber revolver with a cylinder capable of holding 8 rounds. Despite being immediately restrained, he continued to fire until the gun was empty. Robert Kennedy was mortally wounded and would die 26 hours later. 5 bystanders were also seriously injured, but all survived the attack. Sirhan was taken into custody by the Los Angeles Police Department. 5 days later, the LAPD organized a 40-member task force, which was known as Special Unit Senator, or SUS. The LAPD declined interview requests for this broadcast. A spokesman stated, quote, "The reports speak for themselves, and the right person was arrested and prosecuted," end quote. However, the former chief of detectives, with overall responsibility for the investigation, did agree to be interviewed.
So the SUS organization was created to not only to investigate the assassination, but any ramification of that assassination that could possibly be a conspiracy. We didn't know that it wasn't the time it occurred. We had no idea what the exact facts were.
Once the pantry area was secured, the LAPD Scientific Investigation Division began the crime scene investigation. The team was headed by Officer Dwayne Wolfer, a forensics expert. The morning after the shooting, the police discovered Sirhan's notebook at his apartment. 3 weeks earlier, he had written, "My determination to eliminate RFK is becoming the more of an unshakable obsession. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated." The case seemed open and shut. The police had motive, opportunity, and the smoking gun. The weapon taken from Sirhan was a .22 caliber Iver Johnson revolver, which held a maximum of 8 rounds. The LAPD determined that 8 bullets were fired in the pantry, and that all 8 came from Sirhan's gun. The official report concluded that the bullets which struck Kennedy were fired first, from a distance of 1 to 6 inches. However, the exact sequence in which the shots were fired is unclear. This is a schematic diagram drawn up by Officer Wolfer of the flight paths of the 8 bullets fired by Sirhan. Its accuracy is central to the question of whether or not a second gun was fired. In the drawing, Sirhan is not shown. This is a computer-generated simulation of the shooting, based on the official diagram, with Sirhan included. Sirhan is depicted by the red figure, and Robert Kennedy by the white. The LAPD has positioned the senator with his right shoulder turned towards Sirhan. 1 bullet entered the back of Senator Kennedy's head, just behind his right ear. This was the fatal shot, and according to police, was the first one fired. Another penetrated the senator's right rear shoulder and lodged near his spine. A 3rd bullet entered Kennedy's back at an upward angle. It exited through his chest and was believed lost somewhere in the ceiling. A 4th passed through the right shoulder pad of Senator Kennedy's suit jacket. This bullet traveled at an upward angle, and according to the LAPD, then struck Paul Schrade in the forehead. Schrade was standing approximately 4 feet behind Kennedy at the time.
I talked to Paul Schrade. Paul said that he had to be 9 feet tall or have his head on Kennedy's shoulder in order to be hit with this bullet. But this is key for the LAPD, that this is believed that bullet hit Paul Schrade, because if not, then there's another bullet in that room, which means there's a second gun. So literally, people have to be contortionists in order to make the bullet flight paths of the LAPD work.
According to the official version, 4 other bullets struck bystanders. One of these bullets ricocheted downward from the ceiling and hit campaign worker Elizabeth Evans in the head. But medical records show that the bullet which struck Evans entered at an upward angle.
If a bullet ricochets from the ceiling and comes down through another tile, it's going in a downward direction. You can't have a bullet going in a downward direction medically enter from any other direction than downward. Yet her bullet entered going upward.
The autopsy of Senator Kennedy concluded that the fatal shot, as well as the 2 other bullets which injured Kennedy, were fired at an upward angle from point-blank range, 1 inch to 1.5 inches away. These findings have never been disputed. However, the eyewitnesses who testified at Sirhan's trial placed the gun muzzle a foot to 3 feet away from Kennedy.
If that bullet which killed Kennedy, It was an inch away from his head. This bullet didn't come from Sirhan. Did not come from Sirhan. Because he never got that close.
Eyewitness Carl Euchre was standing next to Sirhan when the first shot was fired. Euchre was a maitre d' who was leading Senator Kennedy through the pantry at the time of the shooting.
Mr. Kennedy was shaking hands, and I was holding his hand, his arm. I was trying to pull him, getting into the colonial room. By that time, Sirhan came behind me, and he was trying to get through me, but I was pushing him back. And then I saw the gun when he shot him twice. Grabbed him, got him in a headlock, and pushed the gun away. And I was holding his hand over the steam table, and he kept shooting. And I say it again and again and again. That gun never got that close to Mr. Kennedy's head.
At the trial, Euchre testified that Sirhan fired only 2 shots before he was forced away from Kennedy. However, the official report stated that 4 shots were fired before Sirhan was restrained.
The gun was, I'd say, approximately anywhere from 1 to 2 feet away from him at the time of the firing of the first 2 shots.
He was not an inch away from Kennedy's head because he was across the room on this ice thing, and the room, I don't know the dimensions of the room, but he was not an inch away. And I'm not a coroner, but he was not an inch away. It was more than inches, it was feet.
None of the eyewitnesses who testified at the trial believed the gun could have been 1.5 inches away from Kennedy. The LAPD determined that all the eyewitnesses were mistaken about what they had seen due to the panic and chaos of the moment.
There is always the need for careful examination of the eyewitness account of what happened. These people are not in any sense making anything up. This is what they believe they saw.
You put all these things together, it's difficult to discern. Under any circumstances, how Sirhan, who is on top of a steam table, at this point at least from 3 to 6 feet away from Kennedy, could have shot Senator Kennedy from behind. It's an impossibility.
My opinion, and being close to the investigation during its entire life, was that the investigation was thorough, that the men who did the investigation were dedicated, and that the conclusions we drew from their investigations are accurate.
The only way that you can jibe what the coroner said, what the LAPD said in its crime scene examination, what the eyewitnesses say they saw, the only way you can jibe all of that is that there was a second guy firing a gun in that pantry that night.
Was there more than one gun in the pantry that night? Eyewitness Richard Root claims that he saw a security guard pull his gun during the shooting and then leave the room.
I noticed that there is a gentleman in some type of a uniform, and he has a gun out. That gun is in his hand. But that gun was not aimed at Sirhan, who had just fired. It was in his hand, aimed down. Not at Kennedy, but down toward the floor.
The security guard has acknowledged that he unholstered his weapon that night, but denies that it was fired. He cooperated with police and was cleared by the LAPD of any involvement in the attack.
We could not make any connection between Sirhan and this guard prior to that evening, none at all. That meant that it would be a phenomenal leap of logic to think they would both be in the kitchen at the same time unless there was a connection. So we did not, and I do not in any way believe there's a second gun involved.
I can't get a match. Here, take a look.
In 1975, a lawsuit filed by one of the surviving victims resulted in a re-examination of the firearms evidence. A panel of experts compared the 3 intact bullets recovered from the victims, as well as test bullets fired from Sirhan's revolver. Their findings did not rule out the possibility of a second gunman.
The 3 victim bullets were identified as having come from the same gun. The Sirhan gun has never been identified as firing those victim bullets, and that in and of itself is not conclusive that the Sirhan gun didn't do the firing. So we're left with the dilemma that we have 3 victims struck by bullets from the same gun, but we don't know whose gun it was.
The LAPD says that there were 6 victims who were hit by 8 bullets. They say that Sirhan made good on all 8 shots. They've accounted for all the bullets. You prove one more bullet, there's a second gun in that room.
According to Dan Moldea, photographs taken of the pantry entrance add to the possibility that more than 8 shots were fired. This FBI photograph identifies 2 bullet holes in the left door jamb, which are not accounted for in the official report.
This is the FBI's photograph from the scene and their accompanying caption from the June 8, 1968 FBI report. E2, a close-up view of the 2 bullet holes of area described above. Here's E2, and these are the 2 bullet holes as the FBI describes them. Not alleged bullet holes, bullet holes. E3, close-up view of 2 bullet holes, which is located in center door frame inside kitchen serving area in the direction of the backstage area. This is photograph 3, again, FBI, the bullet holes themselves. Not reported bullet holes, bullet holes.
That's not terribly unusual that anything that looks suspicious at that time would be recorded. That's not unusual at all. The fact that it turned not to be bullets, is just the way it turned out.
I saw 2 bullet holes in a center divider. I saw 2 bullets in the holes. I know what I saw, and the issue, obviously, is that others say that they weren't there.
It's a supposition on my part that the door jambs, whatever was in there that looked like bullets, were extracted and found not to be bullets. I presume that was done, but I don't have personal knowledge of that.
I have serious reservations whether or not any of Bobby's wounds were inflicted by Sirhan's gun. I, at this point, feel that there probably was a second gun there and that it was fired.
Portions of wooden door frames were removed from the pantry and booked into evidence. Police records state that they were destroyed on June 27, 1969, 2 months after Sirhan's conviction.
They were bulky, and they asked me if they could destroy that, and I said yes. Somebody at one time asked me if I had anything to do over again, would I change anything? And I said, sure, I would not release those panels, door jambs or whatever you call them, because of the problems that have come out of that.
I think that the LAPD thought they had an open and shut case. And when extra bullets showed up and when other crime scene evidence didn't jive with the official version, I think the question became one of, nothing's going to bring him back. So why confuse all of this with the facts? And I think that the case just rested there. And it's been resting there for the past 22 years.
If there was someone who has additional information that would indicate conspiracy of any kind, or that Sirhan did not shoot Kennedy, I want to know about it. And if there is, the case should be opened immediately.
4 days ago, the Washington Post published an article by Dan Moldea containing additional information which supports a second gun hypothesis. We interviewed Moldea a second time about this new evidence. Since last December, Moldea has conducted over 100 separate interviews with LAPD officers and officials, LA County Sheriff's deputies, and city fire marshals. Some of them are now retired, but many were present at the crime scene investigation.
These interviews are authentic, they are on the record, and many of them are on tape. And what I did was I basically asked these officers two questions. What did you do that night, and what did you see? These officers had no idea of the significance of what they were telling me. They were giving me direct responses to my direct questions. And about 20 of the people I talked to had clearly identified bullets, bullet fragments, or bullet holes at the crime scene itself in the kitchen pantry.
According to Moldea, the bullet holes and fragments that were described by some interview subjects correspond with the FBI photographs taken at the crime scene. During his interview, Moldea referred to transcripts of his conversations with officials.
I have a sheriff's deputy who says, quote, I remember one person trying to take a bullet out of the wall with a knife, a silver knife for a souvenir, end quote. I have one of the photographers saying, quote, I remember taking lots of pictures of bullet holes, 6 or 7, end quote. And when I asked him how sure he was that these were bullet holes, he was defiant with me, and he said, quote, a bullet hole looks like a bullet hole if you photographed enough of them, end quote. A detective who was there told me that he had seen, quote, quite a few bullet holes and actually identified the location of one bullet in the wall which corresponded with an FBI photograph. Another detective who was there that night told me about a bullet hole he had seen in the center divider at the crime scene between 2 swinging doors. Another LAPD sergeant told me, quote, as I was making my rounds, some bullet holes were pointed out to me in a door frame, end quote. And then he added that during a subsequent tour through the pantry, quote, one of the investigators pointed to a hole in a door frame and said, quote, we just pulled a bullet out of here, end quote. And then one crime scene investigator told me that he'd observed one of his supervisors remove 2 .22 caliber bullets from the center divider itself. Now, according to the Los Angeles Police Department's official reports, there should have been no bullet damage in the walls and the door frames at the crime scene that night. All of Sirhan's bullets have been accounted for. Now what we have is a situation where the Los Angeles Police Department, officers and top officials, are now corroborating what the FBI indicated in its photographs and accompanying captions back in 1968, that there were additional bullets and bullet holes at the crime scene itself. Now, if they are right, then there is a second gun in that room that was fired. And I think the only way to resolve these questions is to simply reopen the case.
After publication of the Washington Post article, we contacted the Los Angeles Police Department for their response.
Whatever that reporter says is irrelevant as far as we're concerned. We won't debate it, we won't discuss it. The investigation and its results reflect what our official position is, and that is that the murderer of Senator Kennedy was arrested and successfully prosecuted and continues to serve time.
Final services for Robert Francis Kennedy were held on June 8, 1968 at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City and were televised live to the nation.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today pray that what he was to us and what he wished for others will someday come to pass for all the world.
22 years have passed since Senator Robert Kennedy was laid to rest. But the events surrounding his death are still at issue. Was there a second gun in the Ambassador Hotel that night? Did the authorities overlook crucial evidence in the understandable rush to convict Sirhan Sirhan? And finally, if a second gun was fired, who pulled the trigger? The possibility that someone else may have been involved in the assassination of Robert Kennedy is staggering and difficult to accept. Some investigators believe there may be more witnesses whose accounts have not yet been heard. If so, they are urged to call our toll-free